Well, hi everybody. Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. I am the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley. As I said, I'm the host of the Godcast. I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, a priest story which is available in all good bookshops and online in Amazon and such like. My guest today on the Godcast is Martin Saunders. Martin is an author. He's written numerous number of books. He's also the Deputy Chief Executive of Youthscape, a charity that is designed and dedicated to improving young people's present lives and their future lives as well. So it's going to be really fascinating catching up with him now. So do enjoy this interview. If you do, check out hundreds of others on YouTube and on social media. But for now, enjoy this Godcast interview with Martin Saunders. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Martin Saunders. Martin is an author, a writer, and he's also the Deputy CEO at Youthscape, which is a charity which is dedicated to improving young people's present and also their future. Martin, it's fabulous to get you on the Godcast. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you.
Where's home, Martin?
I am based in Reigate in Surrey. The Youthscape offices are in Luton in Bedfordshire, so it's a bit of a commute, but get to listen to a lot of podcasts. I'll definitely be tuning into future episodes of this one.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Martin, just for people who might not be familiar with your work and yourself as a person, just give some context to what you do. I alluded to there at the beginning that you're a writer. Just tell us about your writing career and how that evolved and where the love of writing came from.
Yeah, well, that's a big, maybe a bigger question than you know. So, I guess first and foremost, I've always seen myself as a writer, and other things have sort of come alongside that. I think I've been writing stories and things since before I could actually write. I'm told by my dad that I used to dictate stories to him as a kid, and he would write them down and fill exercise books with them. That's a bit of a family legend. Um, and I'm sure they weren't very good, and that may be a recurring theme through all of my work ever since. But it did mean that I got into writing in lots of forms quite early on. I was the editor of my student newspaper at university, where I got into like writing columns and interviewing people and writing features. And then out of university, I started working for a Christian media organization. Did lots of writing for them, and through kind of contacts I made there, ended up writing some books as well. Wrote some books far too young, I have to be honest with you. So don't read any of my early work. But I have. It does mean that I have written quite a number of books that you would, I guess, have to term Christian books. But in the middle of that, I actually had a spell as a failed Hollywood screenwriter. And so I spent 3 years hopping across the Atlantic, working in Hollywood on, in the end, some unproduced screenplays with some, proper studios, proper actors and directors. And I actually did get a short film, quite a substantial short film made with a really, with an all-star cast, which was very, very exciting. But it was never quite successful enough to become my day job. So I've written ever since. I still write a monthly culture column in a Christian magazine, which I enjoy. And I've got another book coming out later this year.
And what's that about, Martin? What's that about?
So the new book is called Signal Fire. It's a guide to putting prayer into practice, primarily aimed at young people. And it's really just an introduction to prayer for young people, either who have no concept really of what prayer is, or who want to just understand how to get started in more creative ways than simply bowing their heads in a circle of a prayer meeting or something like that. So yeah, that comes out in the summer, and it's the theme actually of our event Satellites, which is also in the summer.
Yeah, well, we'll get on to the faith stuff in a minute, Martin. But I'm very fortunate that I'm a published author as well, and I have a little filing cabinet over this shoulder of some of the older stuff I wrote, and like you alluded to, some of it I read it and think, oh my goodness me, what on earth? But For young people who might be considering writing, you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? And the important thing is to get your pen on the paper or the fingers on the keyboards, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really important to just get started, and just write is like the most obvious advice you could ever give to a writer, but it's definitely the best advice. There's lots of people who want to be writers, who want to be screenwriters or novelists, and about 90% of them have never really written a word down. They just hold this aspiration. And it's not because of laziness or being unrealistic. It's because the fear of the blank page. It's the fear that you won't be good enough. And overcoming that imposter syndrome is a massive thing, as you know, for writers. But the biggest piece of advice I would say, apart from just start writing, is write something that you'd want to read. Write something for you. You never get anywhere trying to write something for an imagined, correct audience. Writing for, or you might get somewhere writing for market, but the really good stuff, the really authentic stuff, is written in your voice, writing the sort of stuff that you yourself would love to read.
Are you quite a disciplined author, Martin? When you get the idea, do you commit to it, or is it a kind of I'll do an hour, zip away? How does that unpack for you as an author?
That's a really good question. I am, unfortunately, I'm both. I'm very undisciplined in the sense that I'm a great procrastinator and probably undiagnosed ADHD, which I'm actually on a waiting list for at the moment. So I know a lot of people throw that around. I actually think I am. But at the same time, having written 16 books, I do have this ability for hyperfocus. And so what I tend to do is get up early. I have a routine. I get up early, start at 6 every morning, try and get an hour done then. And then my brain is all over the place after that.
You still get a buzz as well. You still get the joy of published day and all that,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I've never really, I've written things that I'm proud of, but I've never really written anything that has taken the world by storm, which is fine. I think there have been audiences for everything I've ever written. People have liked the things, but they've never blown up big. So there's always a sort of anticipation that, like, might this be more helpful, more useful than some of the other things that I've written before? And I do, yeah, truthfully, I do still find a bit of a buzz getting that first copy. And I did get a first copy of a book once, and just the one that they'd handed me, I don't think it was a joke, they printed chapter 1 upside down. And I did have that moment of thinking, every single copy of this book has a chapter 1 upside down, but it was actually a one-off. It was just happened to be the first copy I saw. So yes, also there's just that slight fear that something might go very badly wrong.
Great. It's great to just learn a little bit about your background in writing, Martin, and the other side of your work, the Youthscape. For people who aren't familiar with it, and there will be lots of people who won't be, tell us about the premise and what Youthscape is and what it's for and who it's aimed at.
Yeah, so Youthscape's a national youth ministry organization based out of a local practice. So it's based out of a local youth centre in Luton. And that is the sort of beating heart of our work. We work with and alongside young people, and we learn from them. We learn from the community that they're part of. We learn from the families that they're part of, and the churches that they're part of, and the schools they go to. And having young people in our offices and in our building, day after day adds a sort of X factor to Youthscape's work, and I think it gives us a great platform from which to then be able to speak with some authenticity and authority into the wider church about youth ministry, because we're actually doing work with young people. We're actually doing it. We're not just talking about it. But going from there, we then produce lots of resources. We do a huge amount of research. We run conferences and events for youth leaders, and it's all to do with getting local churches to engage with young people in their communities, giving them the resources and the training and the inspiration that they need to help them going. We don't believe that a parachurch organization like Youthscape is going to fix the big challenge of the church's engagement with young people. The only place that's going to be addressed is in the local church. And so we really exist to support and encourage youth workers in those local contexts.
The national church, Martin. Well, I think this has probably been their aim for many years. Is to grow younger, isn't it? It's to be
That's right.
a younger church. What kind of challenges do young people bring with you? I mean, I suppose on the one hand, of course, you're going to get some Christians who are all in, for want of a
Yeah.
better word, but you're also going to get Christians who are uh, sometimes bowing to peer pressure or outside noise. What kind of challenges do you find that young teenagers are bringing to your doorstep at the moment, Martin?
Well, you do have, as you rightly say, there's a whole range of young people currently engaged with the church, and a much larger, broad range of young people that aren't yet engaged with the church. And yes, there are some young people who, whether they have great leaders or not, really, just they get it. They get faith. They become absolutely. They grab onto Christian faith at a really young age, and that's amazing to see. And so we do still have young people who are going through a discipleship journey and are, going to be the next generation of leaders. And there's lots of really good news. There's lots of really good news as well. But there's also a lot of young people who are there either because their family have taken them along, or they have come because of some connection with school, or because they've been sort of loosely brought into a group, who don't have that deep discipleship connection. And I would say among that group now, we are noticing sort of a massive drop in, say, biblical literacy. So young people aren't coming with any sort of preconceived idea about like who Jesus is or what he did, or even the stories that we would take for granted, like Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and things like that. Like, I think genuinely young people, we can't assume anything from young people. I think the world that those young people is growing up in, that the world that those young people are growing up in is a difficult one. It's a really difficult one. There's lots of issues around mental health, which you'll be aware of. There's lots of not unrelated issues around technology and the way that technology is used. And so we know that the young people that are coming into our church, let alone the ones that we haven't yet reached, are struggling with some pretty big challenges and issues, particularly around those areas. The statistics around adolescent mental health, particularly since sort of 2010, 2011, when the iPhone appeared, are pretty stark. And so there's that to contend with, and obviously all young people are different. So there's a whole range and mix of issues.
I was interested in what you said about biblical literacy, Martin. I consider it a blessing, actually, that myself and my colleagues at our church were invited into secular schools to talk about those wonderful stories that you mentioned: Adam and Eve, Noah and Ark, David and Goliath. And I think there's a misconception by the secular world that these stories are old hat, they're past their best, they have no relevance. But my experience is when you go into a secular school, you do quickly learn that their biblical literacy is at a significantly lower level than if it was at a church school, for example. But you also, I feel, you see the kids light up. I think we've moved on. A friend of mine is Anderson Jeremiah, who's just been appointed the Bishop of Edmonton, who he said young people will not just go, yes, I believe what you tell me. They question everything.
Yes,
in many ways is wonderful. But I do think that these stories have got enormous value to speaking to society. My own preferred way of teaching is to say, this is the story. This is how some people see it. This is what it means to me. This is what it might mean to you. So there is still value in those stories, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we haven't got is some of the baggage that previous generations would have. So a couple of generations ago, you would have had people who actually had quite a lot of religious instruction, and maybe were coming from a position of like, I've already thought this through and I'm not interested. Then the last generation, we had this really strong influence of the new atheists and Richard Dawkins and so on, who I think, there was some influence on parents at home and influence on teachers in schools and on some of the young people as well, which would have made them quite hostile towards those stories and towards Christian faith. I actually think all of that has gone. I think all of that as well. I don't see the influence of the new atheists anymore in the same way. Even on, you used to have those one or two teachers in schools who would try and block everything that Christians were trying to do. I'm not coming across those or hearing those stories anymore. So I guess in a way that's a sign of hope. But I think you're right. The Bible speaks for itself. Those stories are amazing just on standing on their own. What's interesting, we've just done a piece of research as Youthscape. We're kind of rolling it out over a period of years. It's the biggest piece of research we've ever done. It's called it's called Translating God. It's a huge study of young people and how they interact with and how they respond to Scripture. One of the things that we did as part of that was we sat down with young people who'd never really read any Bible stories and asked them to analyze or make sense of stories about Jesus. And they came back with some really surprising results. The things that young people came out with were surprising, uncomfortable, not necessarily what we would want them to come out with. But it demonstrates that they're really open to those stories. They find those stories fascinating, but there's a huge translation piece for us to do for a completely new generation who read those stories through today's culture.
And if we progress on from some of those stories, most of my work is in primary schools, which is a joy. I love doing that. But Stephen Cottrell was a guest on the Godcast, and he said something very honestly. He said he loved the refining fire of teenagers and their questions. And he said one of the most common questions he get is, one, why is the church so homophobic? And two, why is the church so racist?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's a debate to be had over perception over reality, but they're not afraid to ask these kind of questions, Martin, are they?
No, they're not. And you can understand why. I mean, obviously the media depictions of those particular issues don't help, but I think we have got a case to answer. We can't just blame, a homophobic vicar on TV. I think clearly it's in the conscious of young people that the church is unwelcoming to the LGBTQ plus community. And also there's this kind of something around historic racism, which I wouldn't, if I'm honest, and I'm a white man, so very privileged as I say this, I wouldn't have thought necessarily that was the perception of Christians and Christian faith. Some of that will come, of course, from transatlantic kind of media and what young people perceive of Christianity, particularly in the United States. But I'm sure it's not fair to just blame that. So yes, young people are incredibly perceptive and honest. And yes, refining fire is a great way of putting it.
Does this resonate in somewhere like Luton that has got a large community of ethnic minority groups? How do young people, how do they find the tension of their own faith against somebody else's?
Yeah, interesting question. I think the church in Luton is quite notable for its interfaith work. It's led by a guy called Peter Adams, Reverend Peter Adams, who's done some brilliant work. And I think actually what you'll find is an area like Luton is more progressive, has done a bit more work in helping young people of different faiths to engage with each other. So I wouldn't say we see that flare up particularly. And often, I mean, this isn't just true in Luton, this is true in lots of places. You will find that parents of children who are in a faith other than the Christian faith are often quite open to sending their children to church activities because they feel they'll be a lot better than some of the other cultural alternatives. So there is a space for the faith to live alongside each other, I think. And that's never going to be a problem, it's going to be least of a problem among young people, much more difficult among the adult population.
Yeah, and how does Youthscape go about? Well, my brother, we've got young adult children now. They're all growing up and they're on the way, nicely on the way. But he said to me recently, he said the problem for kids at the moment is they live in a parallel universe. You know, they've got the world that they exist in with us as grown-ups or adults or older people, but then they've got this other world, this digital world that we're not really welcomed into. Or if we try and enter it, we can see as to be a bit weird, or or nosy, or encroaching on their private space. Is that a challenge for you guys at Youthscape? You know, because teenagers by nature are kind of, can sometimes be a bit uptight, or they don't they value their privacy. How do you break down those challenges?
Well, I think there's a lot of things we could talk about there. I think that young people generally are desperate for reliable adults who they can trust, who will listen to them, who will be authentic, will not be hypocritical like some of the adults that they perceive in the world around them. And so there's a massive role for church folk, but youth leaders most specifically to play in building relationships of trust with young people, because they desperately need those role models. They're crying out for someone to sit with them and listen to them. I think it's interesting you raised the question of technology. I think we're going to do a lot more thinking about the impact of technology on young people. I didn't necessarily have this here as a prop, but it just appears to be right next to my hand. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which I genuinely think anyone working with young people should read. It's a phenomenal book about how what's happened in technology in the last 12 years has completely changed the teenage brain, and what we are reaping as a result of that. So in about 2010, I think I mentioned it before, in about 2010, we got the iPhone 4 with the front-facing camera and the advent of lots of social media apps. And that has changed, Jonathan Haidt calls it the rewiring of childhood. It has changed adolescence. I think there are some massive challenges for young people. We talked about mental health. There are lots of other challenges to have relationship building, education, how they engage with each other, and I think there's a massive implication for how they might or might not engage with faith and the ability to commit to the quiet, reverent, disciplined walk of following Jesus. That seems to be almost anti everything that young people are doing and experiencing because of their mobile phones.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Martin. I want to ask you about churches who are struggling with youth ministry. We were a church that was struggling with youth ministry, and through the exceptional work of our associate priest and the team around her, we've seen it build and build, and it's been exceptionally rewarding, and it's been wonderful to see, and it's very encouraging for the future. But also at the moment, I'm covering a little village church. You know where I'm going with this, Martin, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, there's one child there, and I think they're only there because they're staying at grandma and granddad's, and they don't have huge resource and support and backing. What advice can you give to people that might listen or watch this? And because I think sometimes people just think, oh, we can't do it. They're almost afraid to have a go, aren't they? What would your advice be to churches like this?
Well, you may or may not know that Youthscape's involved with a fairly large-scale project with the Church of England at the moment as a major part of their Growing Younger strategy called Launchpad. And so what we're doing at the moment is helping churches like the one you describe to get something started where no youth work currently exists. So that's definitely right in the center of our mission and vision. So I hope I can say something useful about it, because if not, that doesn't reflect very well at all on Youthscape. So the first thing to say is that you don't need to imagine that youth ministry looks like a group of 30, 40 teenagers meeting several times a week with small groups and festival trips in the summer and all the rest of it. Wonderful if that's what happens in a particular context, but it's certainly not the norm. The average youth group now is probably 5, 6, 7 young people. It might be 2 pairs of siblings and another child. It's much smaller, and so I think it really helps to have that in our mind before we start thinking about what it would look like to start youth work. And the other thing to say alongside that is it doesn't need to be an every week thing. It doesn't need to be a big thing. It could be as simple as, and this is the case of lots of youth groups at the moment that are just getting started, pizza once a month with the vicar. As long as it's safe, as long as you've thought it through, just inviting a few young people around to the vicarage for a pizza and a chat once a month. That's the beginnings of a youth group. Absolutely. There are different models for how you can start youth work, and I'll just name 3 quickly. There's what we would call build up, build in, and build out. Build up is where you have some children in the church, but you don't have any young people, and so you really invest in the top end of primary. You're going to build a youth group from there. That's build up. Build in is where you actually don't have any young people at all. And so you need to go to schools, you need to go to the community in some way and bring young people into the church to start a group. Build out is where you already have a small group of young people and you start from the ones that you already have in that congregation. And that's a very simple kind of guide to the model. Now, the associate issue that goes along with that is who's going to run this, who's going to staff this, because to run youth work safely, you always need to have a minimum of 2 adults in the room who are working with these young people. You want them to have some idea of what they're doing. You want them to at least be doing good youth work, even a very simple version of that. And so I think the honest answer is that we do need a bit of a revolution in volunteering across the church. This isn't going to come from those small village churches employing a youth worker. It's just not going to happen. But it is possible that we can spread a vision for doing youth ministry among people who might not think they were natural youth workers, but might have so much to offer. Lots of people, the most unlikely seeming people, can make great youth workers. You don't have to be cool. You don't have to be well dressed. You don't need to know the language. You just need to have a heart for young people and be prepared to listen to them and put their welfare first. So I hope those are some helpful thoughts. And Youthscape aren't going to fire me after they listen to this.
No, that's really helpful, and I hope people are encouraged by that. And what about you, Martin? You've been doing the job for a while. You've been working in youth ministry for a while. What's your kind of prognosis, or what's your kind of? Are you an optimistic individual? Are you? What you're seeing giving you hope? Are you worried? Are you fearful? Just tell us how it feels.
Yeah, well, good to have a reflective question. I was the youth worker at my church, St Mary's Reigate, for 5 years. Just taken a pause on that more recently, but did it for 5 years. Had 3 of my own kids in the youth group as well, so that brought an interesting extra dimension to it. And we saw some wonderful things happen in those 5 years. We saw the group grow. We saw young people pursuing Christian faith for the first time. We saw young people bringing their friends. It wasn't rocket science. We had fun. We talked about Jesus. We looked at the Bible together. There's no magic element to what we did. We just cared deeply for the young people, and they felt safe and included and welcome. And then in time they invited their friends. And so having done that, having walked that for 5 years, I am optimistic, because I'm not very good at it. And it turned out that it didn't depend on me. Like, we had a good team of volunteers. We prayed. That's probably a big part of it. We prayed together. We welcomed young people. We listened to them, and they all came. And so yeah, I am encouraged. Now, the slight caveat to that is that we were in a wonderful place before COVID, and COVID really set us back. And it has been a struggle ever since to get young people to re-engage in lots of things, because COVID accelerated a lot of the problems that Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book. I think COVID is a huge, anyone who's in youth ministry will tell you COVID's been a huge problem. And numbers are still down across the board because of that. Whether they'll ever recover, I hope so. I am hopeful that they will.
And as you get older, Martin, do you sometimes think I'm too old to be a youth worker? I mean, I suppose there's this stereotypical image of a youth worker, in van trainers and slightly ripped jeans and things. Is it? I'm hoping you're going to say no. Actually, as I'm getting older, I'm getting better, because I think when you talked about that role of volunteers, a lot of the people in church are older. Let's be honest. Doesn't mean to say they can't inspire and work with young people, does it?
100%. I mean, I'm currently going through a midlife crisis. You might see I've had this ridiculous haircut just this morning in time for this interview. So I'm trying to sort of embrace some sort of Peter Pan complex at the moment. But genuinely, I was encouraged as I did that. I took that role on when I was 40. I stopped doing it when I was 45. So for a lot of people, I was already too old for the stereotypical youth worker. And I've been doing youth ministry since my 20s. What I do notice is that my role has changed over that time. I think I used to be more of a friend, which is a perfectly legitimate kind of approach to youth ministry, an older friend. Now I very much play that role of a sort of parental figure, spiritual parental figure. And that's equally valuable, but different in lots of ways. I think I've also known some of the best youth workers I've ever known have been in their 60s and 70s, and they take on more of a grandparent role. And so no, the simple answer is that it doesn't matter how old you are, but it definitely matters how authentic you are. I think if you try and pretend with a ridiculous haircut like mine or otherwise that you are still 25, then young people will smell that a mile off. But if you just bring your true self and a heart for young people, then I find every time that's enough for teenagers.
Yeah, and anybody who's listening to this on the podcast and can't see Martin, I can assure you he's looking much more youthful than the presenter of the Godcast. That's for sure. Martin, I don't try not to shy away from any questions really, and I don't want to get into a difficult conversation, but the Mike Pivolacci revelations raised concerns about safeguarding, particularly with young people.
Yeah.
Is that revelation in some ways a good thing, because it brings everything out into the open and it makes us more careful, makes us more professional, makes the conduct better, or is it just another kick in the teeth in the hope for youth ministry?
Oh yeah, it is a difficult question, and I was quite close to that situation in lots of ways. But I'm really happy to talk about it. I think it's really important that we talk about it. Of course, I am sad that what has happened for those people, for the victims of Mike Pivolacci. But I think it is really good that we're talking about it. I think it's really good that things are coming to light and not being hidden. And you're absolutely right. We've had this attitude, perhaps even until now, we've had this attitude that safeguarding is the slightly annoying thing that gets in the way of the real ministry of Jesus. And I think what people are realizing is that safeguarding is absolutely at the heart of the ministry of Jesus. So I think it's really good that we are more focused on it, more vigilant about it than ever before. I run a festival now that's not a million miles different to Soul Survivor in a lot of ways, and it is helping us to shape a healthier festival, learning some of these lessons and learning from what's gone before, in terms of the way we hold the meetings, but also in the way that we structure the leadership, the way that I find myself in the role that he occupied in the equivalent organization. So it's helping me to make some real different decisions about how I lead. So no, I think it's all really useful stuff.
Yeah, and on a national level, are you happy how the church is progressing, or are you kind of still frustrated? You want to see the church to go harder? I mean, I agree with you, actually, Martin. What you said, I think safeguarding is it's what I call a non-negotiable. You know, we can all make mistakes, and we do, and we will continue. But we have a responsibility as church leaders, don't we, to protect the safety of our young people and our old people and everybody in between. And if
Yeah.
we don't do that, then we're actually failing in our gospel mission, aren't we?
Absolutely. And yes, I mean, I know there will always be, to some extent, more that we can do. And I appreciate why people are asking for more all the time. But I also think, I'm like you, I know a lot of people involved in the leadership of churches and denominations. I haven't met anyone who doesn't care passionately about this, who doesn't have this as an absolute top priority, from the Archbishop of Canterbury down. Everybody is committed to doing better. So while it is right to keep banging the drum and saying, we've got to keep going with this, we've got to make sure that we are as safe as we possibly can be, I also want to recognize that lots of people are working very hard to make sure that's the case.
Yeah, and that's probably a good place to end, Martin. People are doing some good stuff, and it's important to recognize that despite the misdemeanors of the past. So thanks for sharing that, Martin, and thank you for coming on the Godcast. You got this festival just finished. Perhaps by telling us about this festival, if people, you could promote your wares here, and if anybody's interested.
I'd love to.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So the festival is called Satellite. It's a week in the summer for teenagers, for youth groups to come along to, which is really designed to help them live out their faith all year round. So that takes place in Shepton Mallet, which is where Soul Survivor used to be. And this year it's from the 2nd to the 6th of August. But you can find out about that and every year's festival at wearesatellites.com.
And people will get what? Music, talks, comedy, everything?
Everything. We have some amazing speakers this year, but we do every year. The Archbishop of Canterbury is joining us this year, actually. But also, just to give you a sense of our diversity, we have an amazing Jesuit priest called Father Gregory Boyle, who wrote the book Tattoos on the Heart, who runs the world's biggest gang intervention program, and he's coming along to share with young people as well. So those two and everything in between. And just a chance for young people to know that they're loved, that they're welcome in the family of God, to find out who Jesus is, perhaps for the first time, and get an opportunity to understand what it means to live your life with God at the center.
Fabulous, Martin. It's been lovely meeting you. It's been lovely talking to you, and thank you so much for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much.